somebody's made another pair of amps. What's it doing over here? Talk about speakers and guitar amp tubes.
Yeah, it's tech talk. Guitar amp speakers and guitar amp tubes, power tubes.
Power tubes. And what were you playing?
Okay, well, let's talk about music just a little bit first.
All right.
It's just a blues, just an old blues, right? That you know, it's Key to the Highway, right? But a million people played it. But if you go back to, I'm loosely playing a version, you know, where, you know, this here. That riff is so cool. That's Big Bill Brunsey, that riff.
Big Bill Brunsey.
Yeah, and if you go back, and a lot of people don't know who he was. Go back and listen to him if you don't know who he was.
I'm one of those people.
Okay, because I feel, just me personally, that he's responsible for a lot of the modern day blues guitar, because if you go back as far as you can go, you come to, obviously, to Robert Johnson, and that's where it all stems from. There was no electricity. And a lot of people cite Charlie Christian and T-Bone Walker as the fathers of modern day blues guitar. Why? Because electric guitar was invented and they started that. But I don't see it that way, just my opinion, because you go back and you listen to Robert Johnson, everything's in an open tuning like people played in those days, okay? And what I think founded modern blues was the fact that people started tuning their guitars in a Spanish guitar tuning, which is this tuning, which is standard tuning that we all know so well now. But before that, it was open tunings, okay? So these you know, remember when you look at the old Les Paul ads and stuff, electric Spanish guitar, they always use the word Spanish, because that's how flamenco guitars were tuned, you know?
Flamenco?
And, yeah, and Bill Brunsey was one of the first guys to he's playing the same, everyone was playing what Robert Johnson started it all, okay? But when they changed the tuning, because Robert Johnson did not play in standard tuning, I think that's what founded modern electric blues, because it doesn't matter if it's amplified or not. I play the same thing on an acoustic guitar, and it'll sound the same way.
Or one of your resonators.
Yeah, if you ever, you know, if you don't know who Robert Johnson is, you should. And even if you do, and you're lost musically, just go put those old recordings on. You know, the early Robert Johnson stuff, and listen to it. And it's always riveting. You know, I mean, it's where it came from. But when it changed to standard tuning, was around the same time electric amplifiers were invented and electric guitars were invented. And I think a lot of people get lost in thinking that it was the electric guitar that the Allman Brothers, Jimi Hendrix, you name it, all of them. All that stuff you know as modern music. You go back and you listen to Robert Johnson, it's all right there. Okay? And I think what really changed it and opened it up Wasn't
Did
so
Led
much.
Zeppelin do some Robert
Led
Johnson?
Zeppelin, all of them. It wasn't so much the fact that it was electric, because you can play anything Jimmy Page played on an acoustic guitar, and it
He
still
played
sounds the
acoustic guitar,
same.
but-
No, yeah, but not the acoustic parts. But you can play his electric parts on an acoustic guitar. You see what I'm saying? So that's just where I'm going. But anyway, this is a tech talk about that. But
Okay, so we're
but
gonna.
that's what that lick was. That's Big Bill Brunsey. So
Okay, Old Blues Lick.
shout out to Big Bill.
And what was the song?
Key to the Highway,
Key to the Highway. Okay.
which everybody did. You know, everybody.
I've heard
from
it.
BB
I've heard
King
it before from
to-
other places.
yeah,
Whether
okay.
they're singing it.
So tube tech talk.
Okay, so people have asked you a lot of questions about guitar amp tubes and speakers, and so we're going to go over some of the more common things people ask you to get them all together in this one video.
Okay.
So first we'll do tubes, okay?
Mhm.
Okay. So Bob, is the 6L6 the most popular guitar amp tube?
The 6L6. Yes, it is. It is. It is. It always was, and probably always will be. Even modern amps now, like everything, you're having trouble getting everything because of the whatever's going on in China and the docks and all that. But modern tubes even. But if you were to call and order 6L6s, almost never would you be told, "Oh, we don't have any of those." I mean, it's even the modern tube manufacturers spend a lot of their time making those because everybody likes those and everybody uses those. Okay, so the 6L6 is the most common tube. So let's talk about the 6L6 briefly. 6L6. The point of this discussion is these power tubes all have an inherent sound. Okay, now depending on how you wire an amp, you can push these tubes hard. You can not push the tubes hard, but creatively put a distorted, created sound into the tube, so you're not pushing the tube too hard, you're not folding up the power supply, or you are, either way, whatever. That tube's going to have that inherent sound no matter how you run it, okay? Some of them can do all these things better than others with their own sound, but the one thing you need to remember about all these tubes, when you say, oh, I like these, but I don't like these, well, it depends on the amp you're playing them through too, right? But the inherent sound of them, nice and clean, that sound is always going to be in that tube, and that's the characteristic of that tube. So on a 6L6, it's a very round sounding tube. There's a lot of reasons why it became the most popular tube, not because of guitarists, but because in the tube industry for audio, it became the most popular tube before even guitar amps, right? So that sort of followed through to any, Leo Fender making electric guitar amps. Really, he paid Ma Bell for the circuit, 6L6. So 5881 is a variation. That tube is not my favorite guitar tube. I've never really liked it, but that's just my opinion. If you like it, you like it. But for those that don't know about all these tubes and are going to start exploring the different sounds because you're just starting to play guitar.
So you never designed an amp around a 6L6?
I have, yeah. The 6L6 has to me, a nasally mid-range, a mid-range that I've never been that pleased with. And if you push it, it gets to me worse, but it's that same characteristic, and a very generic tube. Now, the British counterpart of that tube, the KT66, plug it in the same way, same wiring, same biasing, same loading on the plates, okay? And look out. I mean, now you got a totally different sounding tube. Yeah, I know. Like Michelle's reminding me that we got a lot to talk about to move faster. KT66 differs. It'll plug in the same place, works the same as the British version, but it sounds completely different.
And I know you use that.
The
in one of your
slope looks like this. It starts with a very big bottom end, okay, and comes down, drops in the mid, and the highs come up very clear and articulate, okay, where the 6L6 is rounder, like this, all right, and that peak in the mid-range. So they're also not my favorite sounding guitar tube, but I do love them, and I have designed amps and own amps with them. It's a very flat mid-range in the tone. Bottom end is just big and rich, and the high end is wouldn't call it chimey or anything, but it's sweet. It's a sweet sounding tube all the way around, but very distinct. You play, I don't care how you've wired the amp or how hard you're pushing the tube or what your design is, anyone can go, oh, that's a KT66. You'll hear it like that. That's how distinctive that tube is. Anyway, let's move on. Next tube.
What about 6V6?
6V6. 6V6 most people think is a small 6L6. It actually has more in common with an EL34 than as far as plate impedance loading and biasing. Okay, it also has a very distinctive sound, clean, pushed, whatever. That sound of that tube is in there. It folds up quickly, so you've got to design around it, unless you're looking for that. I mean, and if you're looking for that, it's a great choice because of that. Okay, but you know, these things are all things you're going to have to figure out for yourself by listening to all these different tubes. You know, but the 6V6 is a sweet little tube. It's very distinctive in its sound, and unless that really works for your guitar playing, that's another tube. Well, that's the first tube we're talking about so far that can kind of overwhelm your guitar playing, where it limits you. When some people say to you, oh, I hate those tubes, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about, in the way they're wired in most guitar amps, they'll rule you. I mean, you'll have to play that way or you're fooling yourself, because you really have to play to it, which isn't a bad thing if that's what you're looking for. But they are very distinctive.
Does it have any counterpart, the interchangeable tube with it?
No, no.
Have you designed it with an amp with a 6V6?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay. And it has a cooler sounding name too, 6V6.
I love them, but I can only play through them now and then because they'll rule you. They will rule you.
Okay.
Next up.
Okay, well, discuss the EL84.
There you go. EL84, very famous, very popular guitar amp tube, Vox. Okay. This is a little trickier discussion because people will tell you they either love this tube or they'll say, oh, I hate that tube. And let's talk about the people that hate that tube part first. The layman, just the regular guitar player, doesn't know anything about designing an amp that says they hate that tube. They hate that tube because it restricts, again, things they can do, like the 6V6, okay, in a lot of ways. It compresses very quick. It's very limiting, blah, 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 blah. And if you were actually an amp designer, it wouldn't make any difference that you're just a guitar player, because the things you noticed as a guitar player, well, you're going to notice that as a designer too. They're very limiting in that way. But
some people love them.
Yeah, but some people love them because they like what that does to their guitar playing. But going stray from both of those conversations, the EL84 can be an incredible sounding tube. I don't like them in guitar amps, but don't shortchange that tube as a tube, because I've heard people use that tube at 2 watts, so 1.5 watts, okay, as a triode in audio systems, and wow, I mean, you'll just be really impressed with the full range that tube actually has. But the thing you got to remember about that tube in guitar amps is nobody respects its actual values. Okay, there's almost no guitar amp that uses that tube that runs what the tube is designed. That tube's not designed. Ken's amps respected the voltage values of that tube.
The Trainwrecks.
Yeah, but he had so much gain in the amp and so much preamp that you immediately get into that folding up of that tube, and if that's your thing, that's fine. But that's one of the only amps, both of his 84 amps, truly respect the voltage limitations of that tube. No other guitar amp does. And audio amps do that, use that tube, but they don't really use that tube. They use the industrial version of that tube, which is designed. They're all different. There's 3 different versions, and some take more on the screen and a different voltage on the plates. But everyone's got way too much voltage on those tubes. Now, there's a tube called an E84L that was made in the 70s by the Siemens Corporation, and that's a great tube. It eliminates a lot of those problems. You can't get them anymore though, they're really hard to get. You gotta pay a lot of money for vintage ones. That amp on the bottom right there is 4 84Ls, and it's a screamer. And you can wire it,
What was that? What did you call that amp?
the 84L amp. You can wire it
84L.
in the way you would wire something with 6L6, or as far as how you're pushing the amp, push pull. It doesn't have to be Class A. You just wire it raw, and they'll get past a lot of that folding up real quick. They're really cool sounding, but I did that. I built a few of them, but they're just so hard to get.
So if you ever had to replace those tubes, that
it's a nightmare. It really is. It's not something it's not something you can modern day design with. But
so you only made a few of those.
But killer sounding tube. If you ever want to work with them, they're pretty good.
So you only made a few of those.
Right. So similar tone to a perfectly wired 84, which would not be enough. You wouldn't have enough power. You wouldn't have enough gain. But with those you do, and then you get not the folded up sound. You can push them, but an 84 folds so quickly for guitar, it's just crazy. But if you like that, then it's the guys that love AC30s just love. I'm one of those. I love that amp. I always enjoyed it, but it's limiting. So the guys that tell you they hate that tube, that's why they hate it, because it limits them. If that's all you want to do, and you don't want to go no further than that in your guitar playing, fine, but it is limiting. So that's why you'll hear people say I don't like 84 amps, so.
Okay. So last tube discussion here is the EL34 and KT77, which are considered to be interchangeable in guitar amps.
They are interchangeable. Yes, they are.
And that's what you're currently using.
Bingo, you hit my favorite tube.
That's in the 10N.
That's what I put in the amps I build now. Yes. I've experimented with all the tubes, and we're going to leave a lot of tubes out. I've tried just about everything that was ever made. You got to remember, you got to use something that's available too in the modern day and age. You can't,
And that's been a big problem lately, huh?
You can't piss in the wind your whole life. You have to use something you can.
Well, you can't design around unobtainium tubes.
No. But to me, the EL34, we'll call it the EL34. Because in a guitar amp, really, when you put a KT77 in where an EL34 goes, you don't get the added value of the design of a KT77. You just get a slightly better sounding EL34, because, especially in the modern day, because they make the tube a little better, okay? But the things that tube can do that a 34 can't, a guitar amp will not, what's the word I'm looking for, will not utilize that, okay? So when everyone says to me, well, why did you use KT? No, it's really an EL34 amp. It's just that the KT77s I can buy currently are better than any of the EL34s. But if we go back to the originals, go back to a metal bass XF1 Muller, greatest sounding EL34 ever, then you take the early GEC KT77, which I keep them for designing. I don't keep them in the amps so they don't wear out.
More unobtainium tubes?
They sound so close in the same design of a guitar amp, like if you design exactly the same. But I did 77 to me edge out the XF1. That's a pair or a quad that are working as good as the other pair of quad. Compare it, more scientifically. But I will choose those over them. Yeah, but there's no slouch on the XF1. They're great. But so really in a guitar amp, you're really not talking about two different tubes here. You're talking about availability and what you can obtain. That's better. But a 34 setup, not pushed. Again, remember when I said the inherent sound of that tube will stay with it no matter what you do with it with the design. To me, it's just the most overall guitar sounding tube. It does bump in the mid-range. Bottom end is as big as you need, not as big as say the KT66. The high end is not harsh. The mid-range is sweet and smooth. it's just clean. It's just a beautiful sounding tube, and when you push it, it's a beautiful sounding tube. And when you put a contrived, pushed sound into it without pushing it in the sense where your power supply is going to start folding up and everything, it sounds great. You know, it follows it. That inherent tone in that tube follows all the design principles, sounding good, like no matter how you use it. You know, if you push any one of these tubes in the sense of Marshalls and Fenders, where you got a shit power supply basically, which is okay because that's how those amps are designed, but I don't like that. But if you push them that way, where when you hit them hard they're compressing and you have no filtering and you're folding up the power supply, all these tubes will grenade at a certain point tone wise, okay, where that inherent distinct sound they have just starts becoming a mess. Okay, so
The edge of breakup?
no, it's beyond that. The EL34 holds out a good long time. KT66 holds out the longest in that type of design. And we're only talking a handful of tubes. We're not talking all the broad ranges that you can find of tubes that are out there, but that are hard to get. Okay, so the 34 to me is all around best guitar amp tube. But any of this is, if you're just starting out playing guitar, you need to listen to these things and you know, obviously every amp you're playing is different, so you don't judge a tube just by the amp. You know, play a bunch of amps and decide what you like. You know, but the 6L6 is the generic tube that everybody just seems to.
Can you put a 6L6 in any amp?
Nope.
They all have a different little arrangement of their.
Yeah, the voltages are different. Biasing is different. Screen voltages are different.
But the pins are the same?
Sort of, but anybody,
So you can
they're
mess
all
yourself
8-pin
up by
tubes.
putting the wrong tubes in
Yeah,
your amp.
except for the little 9-pin EL84 and E84L. But anybody who tells you that this amp takes, this amp takes 5 different kinds of tubes, no. That those guys, I don't know what they're thinking when they tell you that, because unless there's a billion switches on that amp to accommodate for that, that's just simply not true. All those tubes plate load differently, okay? So that's just not true, and the biasing is so far off. If you think you're going to plug a 6L6 or a KT66 in where a 34 is plugged in,
So just because you can plug it in doesn't mean that it's made for that.
right? And these people make these amps and tell people that, oh, this amp uses 5 different tubes. I've never seen one of those amps once that I put on my bench and measure with a meter, and it's not a mess with every other tube but the one target biasing. Now I've seen some guys that'll allow you to run 6V6 or EL84, but there's switches to change the biasing. And yeah, the plate load piece is way off, but it's still, at least it's usable. I mean, you at least have to be able to control the biasing. You can't just plug different types of tubes in. You know, and there's other things that change in there, but that aren't optimum from one tube to another. But just basically those two things, the plate load and the biasing is a big deal. Next discussion.
Okay, so we're done with tubes?
Yes.
Okay, tube tone tech talk over. Now, we only got one question in the speaker. What's the best guitar speaker ever made? Everybody wants to know that.
Who doesn't ask that?
And I don't know. But that's the only question I have on my list here that I'm asking you about speakers, so.
Because that's what everybody asks you on the phone, right?
Right. Well, I mean, they don't ask me on the phone. They ask you on your comments. They email you. They text you. They call you on the phone.
Okay. I'm going to piss a lot of people off. The best guitar speaker ever made. Guess what?
What?
You know what I'm going to say?
Unobtainium?
It hasn't been made.
It's.
I can tell you what I think it would be. Okay?
Well,
But I've never found it.
you're not
Okay.
answering the question. Okay, go ahead.
Now-
Answer it the way you want.
All different amps, there's a lot of different speakers, and you could say, what's the best speaker for a such and such year champ, or this or that? Okay, well, those questions, that's all specific questions for what the amp does and what speaker's available, right?
Any speaker works
But-
with any amp?
Now, here's an amp that I believe is the best amp in the world, obviously, because it's my
because you weren't.
After all these years, it's the amp I build. Okay, after all this
And
experiment.
the only one you play.
So I'm going to answer the question in terms of my amp, because that's the best place to answer it. Because like I told you, with all these other amps, it's just that, you know, you just use what's available and come up with what you think sounds the best with that amp, all right? And that's too long of a discussion, that discussion. So I build these cabinets to be the best mate for this amp. So you would think, well, I must have the best, what I think is the best speaker in the world in there, right? No, I don't, because I don't think it exists. I have the best thing that I can get my hands on, okay?
You can reliably obtain to put in them.
I can reliably obtain and that I think sound the best in there, right?
And that won't blow up with the amp.
No.
There's the power.
But see, I'm not pushing things real hard. I'm not looking for speaker distortion, but a speaker's got to have a good sound. So let's take a JBL, an Altec, and an EV, okay? Those are great speakers, right? Look at the frame on those speakers. And you're like, oh my God, look at this. This cast frame is incredible. Wouldn't you think that the best speaker in the world should have a frame that good? You're making me nervous. Are we running out of time on the camera?
I can't tell. It's
Okay.
dark in here.
So you would think, whoa, look at this thing. It's incredible, right? Shouldn't the best speaker, wouldn't one of those be the best? But the problem is they sound like shit, okay? They really don't sound good. And it doesn't make any sense because you look at that beautiful, like take the EV. It's a smooth cone for guitar. I mean, who would want a smooth cone for guitar? Who would want an aluminum voice coil? Who would want an aluminum dust cap, for Christ's sakes? You know, there's just certain things wrong with just about every speaker that's ever been made. And then you look at, say, the old Celestians. Yeah, but that ain't going to work for me. I need two of them, and even 230s are going to get destroyed by this amp. But for junk of all-time guitar speakers, yeah, I think the G12H bass cone is the best speaker ever made, okay? Not the ones made now, but the old ones, right? But it's junk. You look at the frame, it's crap. You screw it in wrong and you've off-centered the voice coil, you know? But you look at the frame of the JBL.
But they're not currently manufactured?
No, some people are making copies of them.
Oh, okay.
And they're pretty good, you know? I got a friend that makes them and they're pretty nice. But, and by the way, that guy knows where all the parts are, and so I have an insight to the speaker world to where I don't mind making a speaker myself, but I can't get the parts to make what I want. Okay, because I would want a frame like those greatest frames, okay? But a speaker that sounds good with that frame, okay? So I would want that frame, okay? Giant magnet. The speakers I currently use, is no secret, they're C90s, okay? What is a C90? Let's get this out of the way right now, okay? A C90 is the speaker sold by Mesa that I buy directly from Mesa. Celestian makes it for them, all right? If you take, here, can you get the camera on that?
Try it. Hold it up to the light, just tilt it a little the other way.
Tell me where.
Toward the light. There you go.
Okay, this is not a Chinese 80-watt speaker, but this is an 80-watt speaker that Celestian makes.
Okay.
Okay, look at the screen. I want you to look at the little screen in the hole. You can't buy that from any of the Chinese speakers. You can't buy this from anybody.
Tilt it up toward the light, it'll be more visible.
Anybody but Mesa
There you
Boogie.
go.
Okay, what is this speaker? This speaker is nothing more than the original 80-watt speaker from the early 80s. It's a great sounding speaker. Now, what would make it better? Well, number one, a much better frame than this. Frame's good enough, but listen to that. You want to hear that shit in your tone? You know? But it's...
Well, that's going to sell a lot of cabs.
Well, no, I can only use what the best I can get is, and I enjoy them, you know?
No,
but
I know you like them. Everybody seems to like
this
them.
screen cools the voice coil, and that's why they can call it a 90, because this speaker probably handles over 100 watts. Celestian called it an 80, a lead 80. They make a Chinese version, doesn't have any of this. It has a 17, look right there, it has a 1777 cone. Not my favorite cone, okay? There's not much different between that cone and, say, the Mueller 444 cone, except for the fact that the ribs are sharper shaped, okay, which I prefer. I prefer a base cone, and this outside surround is looser, which, you know, to be honest with you,
I don't just put these in a cabinet. I take my hands and I bust these speakers in and break them in like they've been used for years, okay? And then I electronically break them in, and I fold the cones a little bit to make them feel older and smoother, okay? Because a cone breaks in this way too over the years, you know. I'm giving away some of my secrets. So I do work on these quite a bit before I put them in, and then put them on a machine for a week to break in the spider and everything else, because I'm breaking the spider by hand first by pulling a lot on it, whereas but to me the best speaker in the world would be the 444 cone that's available. But you know how does it fit? See, you can't just interchange all this stuff. It would have a cooling fin. It would have a giant magnet like this, and it would have a cast frame. Okay, and that would be, to me. Now, if there's anybody out there making speakers that wants to make that, I'll be buying them. And I think a few other people will be buying them too, but they're not available. So I use those and make the best with them. Now, the other big important thing about that speaker is what's the voice coil made out of? Because I can't stand that sound of that plastic voice coil that everybody puts in those high wattage speakers, and I need a high wattage speaker. I don't like that plastic voice coil, okay? The 65 watt Celestion has been people's favorite speaker, a lot of really good guitar players for a long time. There's an odd reason for that I don't think anybody knows. That speaker in the 80 came out around the same time. That speaker's been changed, the formula's been changed so many times, but there's something about that voice coil. I don't know what it is. Celestion does, because they still make it for Mesa Boogie. It's the only place you can get it. I think it's some kind of fiberglass, okay? And it doesn't hurt the tone. That speaker was originally, this 80 watt, original 80 watt lead 80, was originally in the late 70s, came out to replace the G12H 30 watt bass cone, okay, speaker. Higher wattage version of that speaker, you know, or the lead cone, because some of them had 4 cones and some of them had 3 cones. Some of them, for those that you don't know, 3 cone would be referred to as the lead cone, 4 cone, the bass cone. And that's what it was. And so us guys around my age, when we were blowing those speakers up all the time, you couldn't really buy them back then in the 80s. So we were putting those original lead 80s in, and it was like Eric Johnson used them on Avia Musicom in his cabinets, and he used them early on because he was in that same camp of, well, we can't get the great old 30 watts anymore. And that speaker sound very similar. Now, any other 80 watt speaker, even if you use the same cones and everything, doesn't. Why? Because the voice coil, the high wattage voice coil, really hurts the tone. But on that speaker it doesn't, and on the 65 watt it doesn't. So I'm not a speaker builder. I don't know what that cone's made out of, but again, my friend that makes speakers tells me, forget it, you're not getting that. You're not going to find those parts. And that, Celestion's making that plate with the screen just for the Mesa Boogie speakers, okay? Now when I get those from Mesa, they come just like that, and Mesa sends me those stickers. And I put them on when I put them in the cabinet because I want everybody to know what they are. But, you know, Mesa doesn't make those speakers. Mesa used the original lead 80s in their early amps, or the EV. A lot of people didn't want that EV. They can't stand the sound of it, number one. Number two, it's just way too friggin' heavy in the little Mesa combo. The cabinet would just come apart. The baffle would blow right out in shipping. So what I think happened is when Celestion just stopped making that speaker for some stupid reason, because I don't know why they stopped making it, but when they stopped making it, I think Mesa went to them and said, hey, you know, we rely on this speaker. And they said to them, okay, well, we'll make it for you. No problem at all. You just got to order so many a year, right? I mean, they're a pretty big company.
So you help them get their order together.
So Mesa's brought that speaker back. That's a great thing that they did. You know, to me, it's you wouldn't want to put that in your, you know, 20 watt Marshall maybe if you turn it all the way up, but I would, because I think that speaker sounds good in just about anything. Okay.
So you like the speaker pretty well, but you wish it had an upgraded frame.
Right. So I'm not saying that's the best speaker in the world, because the best speaker in the world doesn't really exist for me. You know, but for you, it could be anything.
In your mind, the best speaker would be what you just
described. These speakers are all copies of all different things. But what I find funny is that nobody copies
that speaker. It isn't a big deal to go copying that. They all copy the 65 watt, you know, and they're probably all using the wrong voice coil in it, because most of them don't sound like one you get from the 80s. You get a 65 from the 80s, you know, like what was in Robin Trower's cabinets, or, you know, Robin Trower cabinets or anything like that. You got a different sounding speaker, or